He's a lot of fun.
And he's had some quotable moments throughout the last couple of media sessions, and one of them that stands out is calling the defense trash last year. I mean, right there, you kind of stop what you're doing. You're like, wait, what? He said that? And then he also mentioned until I got here.
Yeah,
right.
You know, and I mean, the numbers back it up. You've mentioned that. So your take on the defense and how this defense has improved with Jusuf and how it was bad without him.
Jusuf Nurkic was completely correct. The Blazers' defense last year was trash until he got here. When he got here, most of the season they were ranked as the worst defensive team in the NBA. By the time he got here, they were already starting to make some strides. They were ranked 26th, which is still horrible. But after Nurkic got here, when he was in the lineup, they were a top 10 defense. In fact, after the All-Star break for the second half of the season, they were a top 10 defense. So it is interesting. I'm glad that Nurkic, gave himself a little pat on the back there, and it's well-deserved. But it'll be interesting to see. He talked about how they just have to be better on defense this year, and he's right, and everybody knows that. And that, they're talking about that in the beginning of training camp like they always do. And it's just a really interesting question is how good can they be? Can they be a top 10 defense? Is that even possible with the roster, with the personnel that they have, with the defensive schemes that they use? And that's a really tough question.
And one question I have for you, Jared, is because we talk about Nurkic, but also at around that time, Al-Farouq Aminu started getting healthy again as well. And before Nurkic got on the roster, he was the best Blazers defender. So you think that also had an impact in the Blazers finishing strong defensively, having both Aminu and Nurkic?
Absolutely. I think that's why they were starting to get better before Nurkic got there. They were the worst team in the NBA defensively by a lot for the first 2.5 months of the season. And a lot of that was because Aminu was hurt. And when he came back, they really did start to make some strides. And even though it didn't really work out after Nurkic got here because Turner was hurt, and then when he came back, he had a hard time fitting in on the roster after he came back from injury. But Turner's defense was making a big difference as well before he got hurt. And so the Blazers have good defenders on their roster. Nurkic is a good defender. Aminu's a very good defender. You've got guys who, when they're motivated and healthy, like Harkless and Turner, Noah Vonleh, Ed Davis, they're all good defensive players. But it always comes down to Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum.
That's what I was going to get to. All those guys play, the same two positions that you just mentioned. And when you have a small backcourt like the Blazers do with Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum, who aren't plus defenders, they may not even statistically be average defenders. You need some plus guys behind you. And one thing Terry Stotts talked about so far early in this training camp is that he thought a lot this summer about what to do with the defense. And he said, you know what? And it sounds like they're going to try to be a little more aggressive on the ball. Try to create some steals, try to create more turnovers. He said that's what they need is more turnovers. And so maybe Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum will take that on this year, obviously being the guys who are out there on the perimeter.
So Jusuf Nurkic wants to be a bad boy, and he wants this team to be bad boys, and says it's a mentality. It's not just, hey, this is the label that I want for this team, but they need to be aggressive. It's one of the things he said. You need to be able to die for the ball. It needs to get physical. I think he's the right guy for that job to make that type of statement. But outside of maybe a Caleb Swanigan, do you guys see any other bad boys on this squad?
I mean, I think Aminu.
Yes.
Completely, and Ed Davis, too. A healthy Ed Davis can be as well. He's shown he can battle and bruise down low there as well. The issue is the backcourt, Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum. And when you think of bad boys, you don't maybe necessarily think of the guys, not in the paint. But that's kind of where it's going to start for the Blazers is because maybe having Nurkic and Aminu behind them will free them to be a little more aggressive, knowing that they have these 2+ defenders behind them in case a guy gets by and gets into the lane. And so it will be interesting to see how they develop this year.
And Damian Lillard has mentioned this at practice on Wednesday. He talked about that role and him. He doesn't think he's a bad defender. And a lot of it has to do with how he's maximizing the energy that he has out there because he's doing so much. And he's thinking, well, maybe I need to focus a little bit more on defense, maybe how I manage myself earlier in the game, so by the time I get to the end of the game, I'm not spent. And so I think that there's a lot that goes into this, but you're seeing a lot of the players that we've talked to so far this season talk about defense, and defense has really been at the forefront of a lot of these conversations that we're having with the players.
I mean, that's going to be a big difference for the Blazers.
Yep.
The Western Conference is stacked.
Right.
With all the great scorers that are in the West, obviously you're going to have to score to keep up, But also, if you have a top 10 defense, that's going to help you a ton in the Western Conference, move up the standings. And the Blazers last year were ranked 10th during that stretch when Nurkic came with the Blazers. I think maybe they can end up there again, but I think that's probably a best case scenario with this team. There's still, with what we've seen so far, this is still not a great defensive team, but I think they can be slightly above average.
Right, and not giving up 35 points, 30 points a quarter, I think is going to help them out big time if they can get those scores into the low hundreds rather than 120, 110s. I think also that's going to help because that offense you assume is going to keep you in the game.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Even losing Crabbe, who is a good outside shooter, the offense is going to be there. I really think it comes down to Dame and CJ. They last season was their worst defensive season of both of their careers, and they were among the worst defenders in the NBA statistically. But if you look back to the 2014-15 season, that was the last time the Blazers were a top 10 defense. They had good defenders on the team. You had LaMarcus Aldridge, you had Wes Matthews, Nick Batum, Robin Lopez. But Dame and CJ that year, CJ was playing a smaller role, but both of them had their best defensive seasons where CJ was actually rated statistically as an above-average defender, and Dame was right about, around the average of the league. And if they can get back to that kind of defense, then I think that this team can be a top 10 defense. But it's really on them because you have to be able to attack defensively at the point of attack. Because if you're just letting, so much penetration and so much get past you, then even if you have good defenders behind you like Nurkic and Aminu and Turner, whoever it is, it's just too much, and it's going to be difficult to stay in that top 10.
Right, you're asking some of these bigs to come out to the perimeter, a lot more help side. Someone's going to be open. And the way that the culture of the league is now, that three ball is almost automatic, especially for your elite teams. And that's the trouble that the Blazers were getting into was, using that high pick and roll. Damian Lillard is trailing or C.J. McCollum is trailing, and all of a sudden your ball handler has options at that point. It's usually a nice kick out and someone's getting buckets.